All right, Roger, you want to kick us off?
Okay, we're called the meeting of CBRC is called to order on Thursday, April 13th, 2023. It's my understanding we have a public comment from James Offsink from the TSCC for CBRC members that don't know. That's the Tax Supervising Conservation Commission for Multnomah County, and PPS's budget must receive its approval to move forward. So, welcome, James.
All right, James, I am promoting you to panelist right now. You should see something on your screen. Perfect. We there? I see you.
Oh, is that all coming through okay?
Yep, it's coming through fine. If you could just say your name, you'll have 3 minutes. I'll have a timer on my phone going, so I'll put the sound over the speaker when it's gone.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks, Jordan, for all your help coordinating this. And thank you to all the members of the CBRC. As Roger said, I'm James Offsink. I'm currently the vice chair of the Tax Supervising and Conservation Commission. And the TSCC is a over 100-year-old body, which is unique both across the country, but also within all jurisdictions above a certain size need to have something like the TSCC. But the Multnomah County one, which has been going for that full 102 years, I believe, is really unique in that we are very involved in overseeing the budgets of all of the districts who have a majority of their tax base within Multnomah County and who are above a certain size threshold. And Portland Public Schools is definitely well above that size threshold. So we have the opportunity every year to review PPS's budget and to speak to both executive staff and also the elected board on as representatives of taxpayers on behalf of the public. We hold public hearings. Those are going to be coming up for all of our districts. They start typically in April. Our first one is next week with TriMet, and they usually end sometime in mid-June to make sure that districts have enough time to formally adopt their budget after the TSCC review. So probably PPS's is usually in June sometime. And we really value the work that regular community members, like yourselves, invest in making sure that the budgets are really high quality and that they represent the interests of the general public within the district. So I'm really here tonight just to, watch the work that you do. This is not, I don't know if Jordan or Roger or somebody thought I was here in like a gotcha capacity. Like I definitely am not looking for any of I'm not an expert in all the public meeting laws. That's not why I'm here. I'm just here to watch your process, hear about the discussions that you have related to the budget. And I think that will then inform some of the work that we do when reviewing PPS's budget. We have asked in the past, how has the input of the CBRC been used in informing this budget? Because we feel strongly that if districts are asking members of the public to spend their time, especially on a beautiful sunny day like today, reviewing the budget, we want to know, okay, well, how is that input actually being used to affect decisions? So that's all that I'm going to say. I'm really grateful that you all do this work, and thank you for letting me be here today to be a part of it. And I think that's it. If you have any interest in TSCC or the work that we do, the website for us is tsccmultco.org, I believe. But if you search TSCC, Multnomah County will be the ones who come up. Thank you so much for your time, and I really appreciate all of the work that you invest in this.
Thank you very much, James. For CBRC members, I might point out that the current chair is a former chair of CBRC, Harmony.
Yep.
you're not the first individual from TSCC to observe our meetings, and the questions you pose, we might be interested to hear the answers. So
Wonderful. Thank you again.
thank you.
Thank you so much,
so
James.
Moving ahead, I see we have updates for the group, I know our vice chair tonight is not present. Mariah, is she on the
Yes, I am.
okay. I can't see. Not all the names come across my screen. I'm sorry. I think unless you have something you want to share, Mariah, we'll just move ahead with the next item of update on Berto and district support. So Jordan, it's back in your court.
Please proceed.
Awesome. Thank you. So I just wanted to provide a quick update on Noberto. He has checked in with staff and myself to let us know that he is on his road to healing. So far, so good for him. He's taking a lot of time to rest, which has been really great. Good for him and good for his family. He'll be out for a bit longer, and I can't give an exact date at this moment, but I do know his transition back in will be slow. But I just wanted to let you all know he's doing well. He's resting. He's enjoying himself when he can, and he'll be back soon. In terms of support from senior leadership, Jonathan Garcia has kind of stepped in to fulfill a lot of Noberto's responsibilities over the coming weeks, especially as we roll out our proposed budget, or PPS proposed budget. And the rest of SLT has been really supportive, stepping up and stepping in to help answer questions where and when possible. In terms of questions that you all submit, we're going to just continue things as we have been. It could be a slightly more delayed than it had been in the past, since Noberto has really been putting in a lot of time and effort to get a lot of answers to those questions, or right answers to those questions. But I will say that SLT, Jonathan, the superintendent, has made a conscious effort to fill in where necessary. But yeah, that's the update so far. Feel welcome to continue checking in with me. If you want to send Noberto a well wish or a card or something, you can check in with me. But yeah.
Thank you. Does anybody want to ask a question about what was just presented to us? If not, we'll move right ahead with Dr. Adams' presentation.
Thank you so much. Jordan, it says you've disabled screen sharing.
Darn it. So, okay. Just turn this on real quick.
Jordan likes to control things.
I know.
I try not to. All right. So you got it. Cool.
Yes. Good evening, everyone. My name is Renard Adams. I'm the Chief of Research, Assessment, and Accountability for Portland Public Schools, and I'm pleased to be with you here tonight to share our most recent student performance and achievement data, which was shared with the board also a little earlier this month. And tonight, we're going to talk about our MAP growth data. Questions we had that are guiding the conversation tonight are on the screen. I'm not going to read those to you because I know you can read them for yourself. these are the questions that the presentation seeks to answer and think about. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about the MAP assessment and growth. Growth, as you know, differs from proficiency. It's about individual student progress over time, while proficiency is measured by the Oregon State assessment that is set when a student is considered proficient when they reach a set standard of achievement. The important thing to think about this is that means that a student can be growing if they're below grade level and still not show up as proficient on the statewide test. But we want to monitor both growth and proficiency as we move forward, because we do want to understand, are students growing every year for a year that they are in school? And here, with the MAP assessment, we define growth as the percentage of students whose MAP scores increased enough so that they met their middle of the year growth target. Before we dive into the data, I wanted to offer some reminders about the MAP assessment. First, it's a norm reference test, so its results follow that bell curve that you see on the screen. And this means on average, the MAP expects 50% of students to make growth and 50% of students not to meet their growth targets. Therefore, 50%, shown by the blue curve, is considered expected and good growth. If we can push the growth closer to 60 or 70% or more, we're shifting the distribution of growth and more students are making growth than would otherwise be expected. That curve is, I'm going to call that purple. And if fewer than 50% of students are making growth, that means some students are falling behind, and that bell curve is shown in that light green on your screen. So first we'll talk about MAP reading growth in grades 3 through 8. That's where we give the assessment. And then we'll talk about mathematics MAP growth. On the screen is the overall reading growth percentages by grade level. The most recent year is shown on the bottom in the darker shade of orange. As you can see, reading growth improved during the past year in grades 7 and 8, while all other years saw a decline in reading growth of between 2 and 4 percentage points. That being said, it's important to note that with the exception of grade 6, growth remains above 50% for all grade levels in reading. When we examine our MAP growth by grade level and by student group, beginning in third grade, we can see that most student groups remain above 50% growth, with Asian students exceeding 60% growth. We also see that all student groups, with the exception of Asian students, demonstrated a decrease in growth or remained steady. Decreases in reading growth are also noted in grade 4, with the exceptions of students who are multiracial and not underserved. These are students who identify as Asian and white. Native students also demonstrated an increase in growth, and this change should be interpreted with caution based on the small number of students who are represented here. Also of note here is that Black and Latino students, among other groups, have growth percentages that are lower than 50%. In grade 5, we see increased growth for white and Pacific Islander students, while special education students and multiracial students who are not underserved, growth percentages held steady. While Black students' growth is still above 50%, there was a decline of 4 percentage points from last year. A similar decline was noted or is noted for Latino and Native American students.
I'm sorry to interrupt here, Dr. Adams. I guess a couple of us are wondering, does growth in this context mean the average percentage of growth across a group, or does it mean the percentage of the student population has experienced growth? And
great question.
To what degree?
Great question. It means the percentage of the student population. So if we're looking at, let's look at Asian students here on this slide. This year, and those might be inverted, 49%. Well, let's look at the Black students instead. This year, the darker orange, 41% of sixth grade African American students met their growth targets. And that's compared to 43% last year.
Thank you. Clear.
Sure. So this is grade 6.
I have a question real quick. What determines a growth target?
The average amount of growth for a student with the beginning score in the fall. So each student may have a different growth target based on what their score was when they take the test in the fall.
So is it from fall to is
Winter.
that the 8-week time frame?
It's from fall to winter, yes. Okay, if there aren't any more questions, I'm gonna go to grade 7. In grade 7, there's a little better news. Here are Black, Latino, multiracial, Asian, and white students all showed increased growth as compared to last year. Black students showed the largest gain at 14 percentage points, followed by Asian students with a 12 percentage point increase. And finally, in reading in grade 8, a little more good news. Here again, students of color, that is Black, Latino, Native, multiracial, and underserved, Native, and Pacific Islander students all demonstrated increased growth percentages this year. Now let's turn our attention to the same grade levels, but let's look at the mathematics growth. We'll start again overall by grade level without the disaggregation by the student groups. Overall in mathematics, growth remains above 50% in all grades except grade 6. So there's that grade 6 again that's given us some trouble, and is down across all grade levels as compared to last year. The differences in the growth declines range from 1 percentage point in grade 3 to 7 percentage points in grade 6. And now we'll look at these data again by the different student groups. In grade 3, overall growth is at 53%, which is a 1 percentage point difference from last year. For this grade level, all student groups except white students demonstrated decreased growth as compared to last year, with Black, Native, Pacific Islander students, and English language learners all posting growth percentages lower than 50%. In grade 4 mathematics, the special education student group held steady in its growth percentage, while all other student groups showed a decline. Here, our Black students and Pacific Islander students demonstrated a growth percentage lower than 50%. In grade 5 mathematics, we see that Asian students and multiracial students who are not underserved showed growth at over 60%, while 47% of Black and Native students met their growth targets. All other student groups achieved growth rates of at least 50%. Moving on to the middle school grades. In grade 6, we can see that only our white students and our multiracial students who are not underserved obtained growth percentages at or above 50%. All other student groups had growth percentages lower than 50%, and most saw declines in growth as compared to last year. In grade 7, English language learners, Asian students, and multiracial students who are underserved showed increased growth as compared to last year. All other student groups showed a decline in growth percentages, with most students of color posting growth percentages that are less than 50%. Finally, in 8th grade mathematics, even though several student groups saw a decline in growth, all student groups, save the Latino student group, demonstrated growth percentages of at least 50%. Here, Pacific Islander and Asian students demonstrated growth percentages greater than 60%. And so this part sort of wraps up the data presentation. What I wanted to do now is talk a little bit about our response to the data. And then if you saw the board work session, Dr. Armstrong, our Chief Academic Officer, did an amazing job with this part. So I'm going to do my best impersonation of her. First, PPS has implemented and is implementing and walking along its roadmap to educational equity. It has three major prongs. One is our curriculum adoption. We believe and know that having high quality, grade level, standards aligned materials in the hands of teachers is good for teachers and is good for students. And so we are adopting standards aligned curricula that will give teachers high quality materials that they can use for each student each and every day. At the same time, we're embarking upon a deep and broad professional development and professional learning plan for our teachers, because we know that learning a new curriculum takes time. And so we have a professional learning model where next year, in particular, this year we had cadres where teachers came along in grade level or content alike groups. So for example, third grade math teachers had professional learning at the same time. Fourth grade ELA teachers had professional learning at the same time. And next year we're going to an instructional coach model where there will be a coach in each building. And instead of us trying to pull and tug on the educator's time, we'll be deeply training the professional coaches who will then work with their principals and the principal's instructional leadership team to turnkey that professional learning at the school site. The third prong of our roadmap to educational equity is our instructional framework. Our instructional framework is really a unified vision. It was developed by PPS teachers and some content area staff. And it is a unified vision of what excellent teaching and learning should look like each day in every classroom. It has both teacher indicators and student indicators. And so we are also providing professional learning on the implementation of the instructional framework and the curricular adoptions as they relate to the instructional framework. We also have some ongoing strategies to improve student learning. So our plan is to continue implementing interventions at the school level, like tutoring and our learning acceleration specialists that are tailored for specific groups of students. In fact, our learning accelerations specialists are working with Black and Native students who were identified as students who needed additional support. That's happening in elementary grades and in some middle grades. We will continue to review the curriculum usage in the instructional framework implementation. We know that adoption takes some time. We know we have not all educators using the curricular resources at the moment, and we want to increase that percentage. And so we're going to work on that. We are also working to enhance student engagement by offering learning that will provide strategies to increase their engagement in terms of interactive materials and activities, peer collaboration, and project-based learning. And then I work with the teaching and learning team, and we work together with the schools team to monitor our progress and really make adjustments as needed, right? We provide learning and coaching for teachers as requested out of the Office of Teaching and Learning. And we are also going to be working on using formative assessment and curriculum-based assessment to help teachers adjust their teaching strategies to meet the needs of all students. So I'm just about at the end. This is the last slide. So our overall conclusions that we shared with our Board of Education is that in reading and mathematics, growth remains at or above 50% overall, with the exception of grade 6. We still see differential growth patterns by race in our school district in our data. And PPS believes we're on the right track with our roadmap to educational equity. So we will continue to implement that to provide and unify teachers on a unified vision of teaching and learning in PPS, to continue to provide high quality instructional resources and materials, and to continue to provide professional learning to teachers so that they are well equipped and have the capacity to reach more students each and every day. And this really, the remaining slides were data that the board requested be included, but weren't data that we presented in terms of the participation rates and the participation counts of students. So this really concludes my presentation to you all. And with that, I would take any questions that might arise.
Let me ask Dr. Adams, are you privy to the questions that members have posted in the chat? If so, are you able to see those? Or Jordan, can you help Dr. Adams, or do I ask individuals to restate their question?
I now have access to the questions. Thank you so much.
Maybe why don't you just tick them off then?
Sure. Let me just make my chat screen a little bigger here.
Okay.
So one question was, we're seeing 2 years, and for instance, the decline, how does this look over 5 years or 10 years, COVID being a complication? That's a great question. We have not been implementing MAP reading and math in all grade levels 3 through 8 long enough to look at more than 2 years worth of data. So therefore, I couldn't go back 4 and 5 years. And then we had the pandemic year where some students took it online virtually, which isn't the same as taking it when you're actually in your school building.
Sorry, just to follow up to that, do we have something to compare it to prior to MAP? Like, was there a migration to MAP, I take it 3 years ago?
It was more than 3 years ago, but the migration was slow and over time. They started with a few schools and just, I believe, reading, and then they moved to some schools in math. So it was really, there really isn't something prior that I'm aware of. I'll ask my team because they've been here longer than I have. But to my understanding, there isn't something prior that we can compare this to. What we did do, and what isn't included in this presentation, that goes to a question that it looks like Mr. Kirchner had, is have we thought about what this looks like pre and post COVID? We have done that with students' achievement in the fall, and we've noticed declines in mathematics and in reading compared to pre-COVID or data. But I don't have that readily available at this moment, and I apologize for that.
Okay, thank you. Move on with the next question.
Mr. Cruz asked, do we know what reading and math strands are being measured and taught? I don't have those memorized, but I can get you that information. They are the strands that are aligned to the Common Core and Oregon State standards in terms of the different domains, and I can get that information to you, but I don't have that memorized. And what's important to note is that the MAP meets a student at their instructional level. Therefore, if I'm a 4th grader and I'm in a 6th grade, and if I'm a 6th grader and I'm in a 4th grade reading level, the MAP assessment meets me at that 4th grade reading level and then measures over time whether my reading level is increasing from that beginning 4th grade reading level. So that's a little bit different than the Oregon State assessment, which just says, you know, whether you're reading at a 4th grade level, you're in 6th grade, so you're taking a 6th grade test, and we're going to measure you whether you're proficient on the 6th grade test or not.
I might interject. I know at the high school level where I happen to volunteer, there was a new math curriculum introduced, and but I don't know whether that went on to all grades or whether it was just in the high schools or not.
We are in, I can help with that. We are in year 2 at the elementary level. We're in year 2 of a mathematics curriculum adoption. At the middle school level, we're in year 1 of a mathematics curriculum adoption. And K through 12, we're in year 1 of an English language arts curriculum adoption.
Thank you.
Mr. Cruz asked, can you explain the usage of these data? Yes, I can. And I think we've had this conversation offline. MAP data are used by the system as a benchmarking assessment and to measure growth. We want and expect all students to grow every year academically for a year that they're in front of a highly effective teacher. So that's how we use the data to measure and monitor growth across the system, because it provides us a common lens that we didn't currently have before MAP was implemented in the system.
That might relate to the question before that.
I see it. I'm getting to it.
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, I'm getting to it. That one I scrolled down, so it was the lowest on my screen. So apologies for that. So growth and proficiency work hand in hand. The question is, if board goals focus on proficiency results, how does non-proficiency data support the board goals? It supports the board goals because we understand as students are growing that they're getting closer and closer to proficiency. If we just looked at proficiency results without looking at growth results, we'd be playing a zero-sum game where either you met proficiency or you didn't, and we wouldn't be able to reward educators and building leaders for making exceptional growth, like students growing a year or more, but still not quite being a grade level. MAP helps us understand that so that people can be rewarded for that.
What about report cards and classroom assessment data, that type of? Can you measure growth in those aspects as well? And also the local assessment performance tasks.
So I'm not prepared to talk about the local performance tasks and assessments. I would need Dr. Armstrong for that because those do not live in my department. I don't know that I've ever heard someone talk about measuring growth using a report card. MAP certainly shouldn't be factoring into students' grades. And as I learned the curriculum that we've adopted, I would then be in a better place to make a determination about whether we can measure growth using those curriculum measures. I couldn't say that. We would need to be having a conversation with the teaching and learning team for that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, are there other questions there?
I have a question I did not put in chat.
Sure.
Okay,
Yeah, so I guess my 2 points of curiosity really here are kind of the trend over time. So I guess we're still learning as the new curriculum's being implemented. Since we don't have an apples to apples comparison prior to that, that's my understanding of what you've said here.
Yes.
And then the second piece is I think that it would be really useful to understand or have the standard deviation for these metrics, because I'm curious, for instance, of the 50% growth, how far behind are some of our students? Like, what does that look like?
Mm-hmm.
So I know that's a little more complicated than what we're diving into here, but I just want to suggest that might be helpful for understanding.
Sure. Thank you for that. I appreciate the feedback. We typically in the fall, well, usually a little later in the fall, usually in the winter, we give the MAP assessment in the fall, and we usually talk about achievement data at that time. So we talk about how students are performing relative to a year ago or 2 years ago. And that would be a time where we can talk about the proportions of students who are at above or below grade level. So I appreciate that feedback. I'll take a note for myself.
Just to piggyback on that, if we are comparing students across the board, how can we use that individual data for best practices?
It is not our suggestion or recommendation that MAP data be used on an individual basis. We have some situations where I know it's being used. I know it's used as one piece of data, for example, in TAG acceleration conversations. But my feeling as an educator is that the best and most rich pieces of information are those closest to the student and the teacher and the curriculum-based assessments. And as I mentioned in our meeting the other day, Dr. Armstrong and I will be working on how we can support the use of the curriculum-based assessments beginning in next school year.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I just to have on record that the understanding of the way teachers are using the MAPS assessment is to modify their instruction, but the presentation kind of states that no, we're just kind of reporting on the growth in terms of the MAPS assessment. Is that correct?
We report on both growth and achievement using MAP. We report on achievement after the fall test and growth after the winter test. I cannot speak to how individual teachers are using the data.
I'm just curious what the expectation is. I understand that, but what is the district expectation?
I would need to talk to the teaching, learning, and the schools team to have an answer for you on that one.
So do we have any other questions before we thank Dr. Adams for his presentation and his responses? Jordan, I can't see if anybody's got their hand up or so.
It doesn't look like it.
Okay.
I just want to say thank you for this data, and it's encouraging that you know, some of our students who are in historically underrepresented groups seem to be performing a little better. I'm encouraged by that.
Yeah, we're seeing some encouraging first signs. If you go back to last year's Oregon State assessment data, PPS was the only system in the state that didn't see a decline in math scores and the grades where we had new curriculum. Every other district across the state saw mathematics decline. So though we are seeing some promising early results, the other thing you often see, however, with curriculum implementation is a little bit of a dip when you first start implementing. So we're cautiously, hoping for more positive news as we move through the spring and into the summer and the fall when we get our results. I have, thank you all for your attention and your rich questions. I very much appreciate the time being able to present with you and converse with you on these data. I can talk about data and instruction all night, but I won't. And I want to just thank you for having me here and inviting me. I appreciate it. And thank you, Jordan, for the update on my colleague, Norberto, because we're trying not to bother him. So everyone have a great evening, and I'm sure I will see some of you soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Renard. Thank you.
Okay, Jordan, I see, I'm trying to scroll through all your notes here to get to the next item.
Oh, yes.
Okay, now we're down to the budget book update, and that's back in your court.
Yeah. So I wanted to give you all a really great quick update, and I actually am going to have my colleague Alexander Martin give you this update because she has put in an incredible amount of work, and I want to make sure that folks know that and that she's being involved in this. So
thanks, Jordan. Yeah, this is an exciting update. So we just wrapped up work on finalizing the proposed budget document. So it's going to be shared with the board, and shortly after that, it will be shared with this committee. And so the budget document, as you know, includes 2 volumes. We have our volume 1, which is 300 pages, lots to dive into there. It's broken up into 5 sections and includes a lot of organizational information about district goals and objectives. Obviously, lots of financial information and different background information for you to dive into for all the different aspects of finance. So we have information about bond, and just different ways that you can slice the budget data to get a better understanding of where we are. And we also have volume 2 coming out. So our volume 2 of proposed is individual school reports. So we'll see trends over time. That is both student demographic, student performance, as well as dollars at the school and full-time employees at the school. So lots of data coming your way. Lots of context for the data, also really great visuals. So I'm really, really excited for the 23-24 proposed budget to make it your way. And it's going to be very soon. So we're just, it's going to be shared with the board, and then we'll immediately after that share with this committee.
thank you, Alexandra. So I'll note too that this is exciting because it means that we're getting this report to you sooner than we expected, and so you have a little bit longer to draft your report. And I think I counted this earlier today. That would give you about 18 days to read, review, and come together and create your report. But Mariah, you have your hand up if you have a question.
Yeah, so in reading the budget books a little bit, I wanted to ask a little bit how these are going to be presented out to the community.
How the volume or the budget books will be?
Yeah, for
Yeah.
instance, I'm particularly interested, do you send each school their page? Because I think that would be something of, for instance, interest to my PTA. People are always curious about their own, as well as kind of the larger picture.
That's a good question. And how do we engage the budget holders or the staff at the school and the school communities individually? I'm not aware that we have a process to share that content. It does typically go out in a really broad communication to the community. And as part of its presentation to the board, there are also summaries of the content. And so you'll see a slide deck that has a lot of the key information, really good bar charts and pie charts, and highlighting the key investments and their alignment to district goals and objectives. So there is that effort to provide the information at a really high level in a community facing way. From the point of view of finance, there is also a lot of direct engagement on the finance team with the school staff in terms of their specific finances and how the outlook looks as well. I like what you're asking. And I don't know if we actually do individualized engagement with school sites like that, but I do like that question.
Well, I've documented that question. I think what we can do is we can follow up and ask what kind of engagement is there for direct or for each individual school. And if not, we can just at least send your message along to teams that are in charge of doing that. Because I agree, that's a really great suggestion. Yeah.
I'm just thinking in terms of like clicks and engagement that,
yeah.
I know there's effort involved with all of it.
Yeah. In a similar vein, I suppose one of the major groups that would be have particular lines of interest would be PAT and how the district is maybe trying to address those specific requests or lines of interest there.
Yeah, and I do know the PAT is pretty well informed throughout the process, and I believe, and Alexander, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we share a copy of the budget book with them in this process. Alexander, is that right? I believe we did that last year.
I don't want to speak to it. I'm not sure about the timing and how that engagement looks, and our team doesn't really manage it, right? So I'm not close to how that plays out.
Yeah. All right. Well, I would be surprised if they weren't well engaged and informed, as they usually are.
Do we have time to have a discussion about what the policy roles are for this committee? I know Roger had mentioned that in the email, but I didn't hear back from him.
I guess, Karanja, I didn't realize that you were expecting another response. I thought I had clearly defined that my understanding is that the board adopts policies and visions, and our role is to assess whether we feel the superintendent's proposed budget aligns with those policies and goals that have been adopted and articulated by the board. Ours is not to evaluate whether those are good policies or bad policies, or we would change those policies, or any other notion we might have about the policy. Ours is merely to address whether the budget aligns with the policy as has been adopted.
Yeah, from our mission about the CBRC online, I just dropped this in chat. We review, evaluate, make recommendations to the board regarding the superintendent's proposed budget and any other budgetary issues in the CBRC or the board identity. We also monitor and advise the board on the allocation of and expenditure of local option levy funds. So we're not a policy body in that sense.
And I saw in our question and answer spreadsheet a question about the local option levy, and I believe the answer was there, but it's a property tax just like bonds are, but bonds are dedicated to the remodel of schools and whatever articulation that was made in the bond proposal. And the local option levy has been dedicated to educational instruction and support. And that's basically teacher salaries and salaries of support staff. And so our assessment of the local option levy requires us to first figure out what the average salary is, and then divide that number into the figure that the school district spent on instruction, and to determine whether or not the local option levy contributed as was promised to the voters. And that's basically all our report is, and is usually the shortest portion of our presentation.
What does the term evaluate mean in our role? What does that mean?
With regard to the local option levy, or with
if you look at the chat, this is the direct language of our roles, and it says reviews and evaluates. So my question is, what does evaluate mean to you?
We're evaluating whether or not it aligns with the board goals and vision and directives.
So is that in forms of discussion, or is that in forms of the report? What does that process look like?
Yeah, I mean, our input is received in the form of our letter from the board, or from the CBRC to the board. That's my understanding. Is that correct?
Yes.
Along with these discussions of staff, right?
Correct.
Okay, because I'm a little confused on when I had asked those certain questions in the email, and your response was that this wasn't a time and place for those type of discussions. So I'm kind of confused now on what the role is.
I guess I interpreted your questions as being questioning the policy itself, and that is not our role.
I don't understand. What do you? How did you interpret?
I don't know. I don't understand your question.
You don't understand the question? Is that?
I don't understand your confusion. We do not have a policy role, and we do not question the policy that has been adopted by the board. We only evaluate whether or not the proposed budget aligns with the implementation of those policies.
Okay, so you interpret my email and my questions as a policy discussion?
I'm not gonna engage in that. I don't have your email in front of me, and I thought I answered your question. If somebody else wants to chime in, have at it.
Yeah, I'm just confused. Because on the email it said this wasn't the time and place, like the for that type of discussion. But then
I
you
guess
no, let me
it's-
finish. Let me finish. Don't cut me off. So and it says here, it says he reviews and evaluates. So I'm just curious of what the role is, because you said that wasn't a role. So that's the response. But we don't need to go here, there if you don't understand. So the key question and the key discussion is the evaluate part. So what does that mean and what does that look like? And so you're saying it's an informant of a report. Is it discussion as well?
We
Yeah,
can
so
discuss-
this is Lisa.
Yeah,
And
go.
I was just gonna add that Roger's not setting what our committee is responsible for, nor was I think he was trying to distinguish some of your questions were more policy questions versus how, and I understand where you're going, which is, okay, well, the policy informs the budget and our responsibility is to review the budget, right? And making sure that the board is upholding what they've laid out for the district. And so I guess what I'm trying to say here is Roger isn't the one setting what this committee does or is responsible for, nor is he. You can ask the questions of the staff of what, if you had specific questions, and let the staff be able to tell you whether they can answer that or not, or whether that's in our purview. So I guess I would like to get away from kind of, it's not Roger's responsibility to define what our committee is. That was outlined by the board. And so I'll just leave it there. But I
Yeah.
understand where you're coming from, Karanja, and I understand you're trying to get answers. And I think Roger was just trying to help facilitate that some of your questions are policy related, which really goes back to the board. And the board is where you would, as a citizen, as a parent, you would have those discussions about whether it's the right policy or not.
Yeah, and that wasn't my question. So that was a misinterpretation, because I'm focusing on the keyword evaluate. So that was my thing. So so I was leaning to Roger because he has the experience. I'm new to this committee. I'm still learning. I don't really know. This is new. I'm a baby at this, so I'm learning.
Right. And I know, and I appreciate all your questions.
I'm not done talking. Please. You just made me just lose my train of thought. But go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say, I appreciate all your questions. I think it's great when we have new, fresh eyes looking at it. Like, I really appreciate all your questions and the depth of them. I think that's fantastic. And I'm not cutting any of that off, because I think you add a lot of value and are asking the right questions. I guess it's not Roger that's not answering them because he doesn't think it's the right thing. It's more, if they're policy related, then I think that's where he was referring to the board. And I'll leave it at that.
I think for me, Karanja, when I think of evaluate, thinking of this last presentation with map scores, and I'm just going to qualify and say, I don't think we have enough data to necessarily know. It's not the depth of data I would really want for this. When we're thinking about things like special funding that's assigned, some of the ESSER funding and whatnot, if that funding has it made a difference in map scores? I don't think I personally can take that data and say one way or the other, but I think there are some potential indicators there, right? So the board has allocated certain types of funding toward particular populations, particular schools, Title I and so forth. And encouragingly, we have seen a growth over one year over another in particular populations. So that might be kind of more to the evaluate piece. Again, I don't know that we have enough yet to have a trend.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from in that, but being on the ground and seeing the maps data it's not really effective. So for me, I'm looking at it in a more evaluative point of view. Is this the best use of public dollars to spend? Especially
I'm wondering that too.
Especially if it's not aligned with the board goals, because if you listen to the question, he didn't really answer the question in terms of the proficiency aspect and how the MAPS is assessing not proficiency. So that doesn't really make sense. So if the board goals are looking for proficiency growth and goals, I mean, you can measure growth and proficiency. So I don't really understand the answer that he provided, but we can go back, it's recorded. But yeah, so I'm just kind of looking at more so the role. So the preliminary email that I sent was more so through the lens of evaluating, not looking at a policy or how Roger interpreted it, but it was more so, okay, how do we evaluate this expenditure that we're spending? In terms, is it best practice, and is it the proper data that we need to really look and see what's actually happening into the classroom? As he even stated, it's best practice to look at classroom curriculum data and classroom assessment data, not MAPS data that is assessed on all these different types of strands, but then it's only 8 weeks of instruction. So in the 8 weeks of instruction, if I'm teaching geometry, in that 8 weeks, and I'm focusing on algebraic expression, but MAPS is teaching all the different map strings, that I didn't get that instruction. So how is that proper data in that 8 week time frame if the instruction is not aligned to what is being assessed? So I was looking at it for more of a, here's public dollars being spent. This on this committee, my role is to review and to evaluate and to make a recommendation. So that's through the lens. So I kind of got thrown off when Roger made that response in the email. So I was kind of confused on what the role was. So that's what I had brought it up. If that's
Well, I'm sorry if I confused you, but I was also responding to your response to Dr. Adams and his exchange with you. And again, I think Mariah and Lisa have articulated what our role is, and so we've got an awful lot of reading to do once we do receive the proposal that will be sent to us via email. I know Jordan will be asking for those of us who wish to receive a hard copy of it. Again, we by receiving it now, we do have more time to review it than we were given even last year. So, but it's always a very condensed period of time that we have to do our work and so on. And I appreciate all your questions, and I don't mean to be trying to cut anybody off by any means. I'm only trying to share what my understanding is our role. So, so do we have any other questions?
Roger, I want to acknowledge that Stephen's got his hand up.
Okay, Stephen?
Yeah, I just want to, I don't want to extend that further. I just want to say that what Corinne just says makes sense to me. I find the distinction between policy and budget difficult to understand. I think budgets are policy, and policy have budget implications. And so I think there's some sort of like a line there, or is there some room for interpretation? That's just my perspective here, and I think we should be flexible in terms of like how we see that one.
Okay, Stephen.
Again, as in my response to Karanjo, I pointed out that committee members are at liberty to present to the board at any of its meetings, identify themselves as a member of this committee, but in so doing, not speak on behalf of the committee, but speak as an individual. So, so that's a way you can influence policy adoption, vision directives that the board issues throughout the year. And as I have sometimes reminded board members who often complain, well, I didn't have very much of a role in the presentation of the budget or its formulation. And I said, well, that's not really true. You adopted policies throughout the year that the superintendent is now trying to implement and by his budget proposal. So let's move ahead, I guess, if there's no other further questions or hands raised. Like I say, my screen doesn't show all of you, so I can't see when a hand is up or not. So Jordan, what's the next thing on the agenda?
It was going to discuss the report workflow, or just discuss that a little bit further, since you all will be diving, or you all will have access to the budget books really soon, and then our next in-person meeting isn't until closer to the end of the month, and so there's just wanted to put it out there to discuss how you all would like to put this report together. If there's, extra needs, if you want to meet in person, if whatever it is you need or might think you might need, just discuss now, and we'll continue to have that discussion. But
okay,
yeah.
Thank you. Last year, Lisa.
Oh, sorry, Roger. Sorry, one quick, because Karanja had a question in the chat that is relevant to this. What day will the budget be available for us? So the plan was to release that to the board this evening, and then directly after that, we will, or I'll be emailing it to all of you. So you will likely see it tonight in your email inbox.
Before midnight.
I really hope so, because I don't want to be here that long.
So okay. I started to say last year we were guided by the help of Lisa, who did a segregation of the document, and then had individuals on the committee prepare comments on their portion that they were assigned, and then we engaged in a I like this, I don't like this, or editing kind of a general document. That was the way the report was generated last year. I'm open to discussion as to how we might proceed this year. I can tell you historically, the years that I've been on the committee, there have been years where the chair and the co-chair have essentially done the drafting, and committee members chimed in one way or the other. But it's a labor. Our report is rendered to the board at its board meeting on the May 9th, but the document itself needs to be in the board office by May 2nd. So because our report goes out in what is known as the board packet, where so the board has the opportunity to read and digest the material that's on their agenda. I can tell you as a follower of the board meetings that I'm not so certain that every board member reads the packet, but So Lisa, do you want to lead the discussion?
Well, I think for me, I think what we've talked about before is last year we divvied up the various pieces of it, and each person took on and you know, as you remember, we had a very small group last year, and we have a bigger group this year. So maybe we can think about how we would assign and or facilitate discussions and coming up with common themes that we could have discussions around as we try to formulate what our recommendations are. I'd be interested to hear from the group and or we can kind of lay out a timeline of when people would need to you know, add comments and kind of some kind of key themes that people are thinking about. And maybe that's kind of the first step to figure out, once we review the budget, coming up with what are some of the concerns and or pieces within the budget that people want to take on, as, you know, where we see kind of the pluses and minuses of where they've designated money for.
And I was wondering what you thought about I was rereading the questions and answers that have been submitted by both the board and the committee members, and as has been expressed, some of the answers have well, let's just say it leaves something to be desired. And without having seen the proposed budget yet, there maybe there's further answers to be gleaned there. But there may be some unanswered questions that were raised that that maybe might be articulated in our report. So.
Yeah, and that's a good idea of maybe that's where, and I'm happy to kind of scroll through and kind of pull some themes out that we can have people focus on.
I can give you an example. You know, I in one of my questions ask about the deferred maintenance, and it's rather alarming that the answer that was received last year, we were told it was 600 million. And this year we're told it's in excess of $1 billion. That's quite a jump, and I didn't see an articulation of a real meaningful means of addressing that, other than to say, well, future bond measures will address it. I don't know that that's in keeping with what's been promised to voters, but that's personal opinion. I think it's a ticking time bomb myself.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, Roger. And PPS isn't alone. I know PBOT's facing billions of dollars themselves.
Yeah,
I mean, we've fallen behind in our infrastructure, and rising costs and salaries and inflation are not helping that. So I think it's a worthwhile question. Thank you for calling it out to raise in our letter. How that's planning to be addressed. I think that's well within our purview. Yeah.
I don't know if my question was addressed in the chat. Did you all see that?
no,
Oh, sorry.
no, I'm not reading the chat, I guess. What's your question you want to tell us?
I don't know. I was trying to get an understanding on what I don't know if that question was answered. I didn't really understand it, maybe. The role of evaluating for this committee. What does that mean?
Well, I'll ask someone else, other than myself, to try to answer that.
Well, there's different ways you can. It's a good question. I think there's different ways. My personal interpretation would have been assessing. So in the context of that quote, you review. That means that you read it carefully, and then you evaluate. It means that you assess whether it, whether, like to whatever goals you to the goals, and then you make recommendations based on that evaluation.
Anybody else want to take a jab at it?
So Karanja, can I just ask, so is it, I guess, are there specific issues that you feel that you want to comment on, but now feel that you can't? Or is it you're just really trying to understand what our role is? And, one, I think, again, like just kind of like, what is this committee? We're really like, we review and kind of evaluate based on the goals. And so if one of your concerns, let's say, was the MAPS testing, and you don't think that's the right way we should be assessing student performance, you can certainly say something to the effect of that the board might want to consider alternative options of how they're going to evaluate student performance. And like you said, maybe it's at a different level of testing or whatnot, but that's certainly in our purview to at least bring that up as, and I know we've talked about this before, of what is the accountability and how are we measuring our success, right? And our outcomes. And so that's certainly in our purview, but we just have to be careful of, we can't say don't do it and don't then spend money on it, but we can certainly say there may be some alternatives that the board should start looking at. And I don't know if that answers your question, but I do think there's room for those types of things. We just have to word it in a way that we're not making policy decisions, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you for that. But yeah, the original is just to get an understanding of what the role is. Like, that's like what, if it states, in policy, if it says reviews and evaluates. So I'm just curious of how that is interpreted for our role.
I just want to add this sentence, at least this definition does not say in what way we are supposed to evaluate. So typically an evaluation would be with respect to something. There's no mention here of goals. So this is it's a pretty vague description, and I can see how that can be confusing. Like I think it's an important conversation.
Karanja, and I'm on the phone, so I can't see if other people have their hands up, so I apologize. But one thing that might be helpful, and maybe you have already, is to look at previous years' letters from the CBRC to the board, because I think that gives you an idea of kind of like the themes and the detail and the depth to which we're writing, reviewing, evaluating the budget, and talking and having making some recommendations on how they could improve the budget, or things they should be considering that we don't feel they are or haven't addressed to the depth that we think they should. And I think that potentially could give you a good idea of kind of like what's under our purview and where kind of the general line is of how we can inform the budget process.
What is the process like? For example, like I know PAT is asking for a 4 to 5% salary increase. Would we be able to review that in the district budget if they're going to honor that or not? And could we recommend that they honor that request?
So I think this came up in the emails exchange. And my understanding was some of that is union led. And so I guess that one, I'm not really clear on how much we could have any sway on that, because it's outside of that to me would be something outside of our purview, other than to say we would support that. But I mean, that's negotiations way beyond what our committee can have any say on.
But isn't that reviewing and evaluating the budget if they have a certain budget allocation for salaries?
It's my understanding that the board has a set aside that they're guided by in their bargaining, but bargaining is not in our purview, and there's
I'm not talking about I'm still on the role of CBRC.
I'm trying to respond to your question. It's my understanding the board is still engaged in collective bargaining, and so we can opine that we feel that the teachers are well deserving of a salary increase in alignment with their request. But other than saying that, I don't think we have a role.
I actually feel very strongly we should not weigh in on a collective bargaining issue. It would be very hard for this committee to tie a position on that to outcomes, which is what we're looking at in terms of the budget. Does a raise for teachers right now support the board goals? I don't have a way to evaluate that based on the data offered. I think it's a very, very sticky piece of policy and politics. So I would actually propose to move on from this discussion if we could. I think it's been worthwhile, and we could continue this in email.
Okay, are there other questions?
Okay, before we move on, I just want to get a clarity understanding. I'm not talking about to get involved into the bargaining, so please understand what I'm talking about. I'm talking about in the framework of what our role is in terms of review, evaluate, and make a recommendation. So if we are reviewing a budget that has a certain allocation for salaries, isn't that our role to review that and to evaluate that? Nothing more, nothing less.
Well, we would review and evaluate that line in terms of its ability to meet the board goals. I don't feel that I've had data presented by any of our presenters that helps me tie those two things. So I would only want to speak to in our board, in our CBRC letter, things that we have data that, now it's a question you can ask, but we haven't had the data presented.
What type of data would you be looking for?
I'm going to be straight. I don't think there's data that we can see right now that ties an increase in teacher salaries of a certain percentage to things like student performance, especially student performance according to like third grade math goals, something of that nature. That would be very hard to assess for us as our role as community members.
No, I understand it. I was referring to what you just said in terms of the data. Like, what data would you be looking for?
Honestly, I would have to rely on professional staff for that. I don't have a good idea on this one, but this just doesn't feel within our role. But I think what we should do here on this question is look back at past letters to see if past committees have seen this sort of thing as in our purview. I suspect not.
I think, I mean, one thing to keep in mind here, so we have 18 days until between this report comes out and we need to write this thing. We can probably write a letter that is longer than the budget. Budget report, so I think this is probably not good. We don't have any voting power. We don't have anything but the pen or some sort of like the black ink on a whatever paper. So I think like my take on this is like, to focus on things that we think are important for the and constructive for the board to consider, and within some sort of reach of them to change. That'll be my focus on this, because I think that's for me the highest chance that something comes out of that.
Okay. Let's move on, I guess. Are there any other observations? Jordan, I think it would be helpful if you would review the dates of and times of the forthcoming meetings.
So just looking at this, so the plan is to get you all the budget this evening. So I think that leaves about 18 days, and I will explain very briefly why that 18 days is the case. So the proposed budget will officially be released publicly on the 25th of this month, which is a little over a week from now. And then from that point forward, you have a CBRC meeting on the 27th, and then the following week on the 2nd of May is when you would have to get your report to the board. And the reason that's the case is because the board requires materials sent to them a week in advance so that they can review it. Now, of course, that doesn't mean you can't approach and ask the question if you need more time, but the ideal is to get it to them a week in advance, which would put you at May 2nd, because officially the CBRC would be presenting the report to the board on May 9th, which is how I came up with that number of days. So just out of that, something I'm noticing is you only have really one CBRC meeting in between now and that time to get a report put together. That meeting is not for another couple of weeks. And so I don't know if you would all want to meet add a second meeting within that period of time, if you'd like to have a meeting in person, if that's easier for some folks, or a hybrid meeting. If we want to start we could potentially start just a draft document. Folks can make suggestions in the document, work digitally. There's a number of ways you could do it. Also, depending on how you split up the recommendations, each of you could take your own, create your own recommendation. You can work together on a recommendation. There's just so many different ways that you could possibly do it. But I will say, just having one meeting in between now and getting your report done may not be adequate amount of time. So,
Lisa, what would you think about trying to make assignments by next week?
Yeah, I guess that would depend. I think we should probably back into the May 2nd as far as kind of due dates, and I'm happy to work on that. Second would be who's willing to take on pieces, and or how. I think we need to come up with some structure of how people are going to, like Jordan was saying, how people can contribute their ideas and all that, and maybe it is just a kind of a group document that we can kind of put some themes and other things into, and then figure out who has the time and is willing to take on those pieces and assemble.
Well, I'm wondering what the committee thinks about maybe our trying to meet on the 20th, a week from today, and be prepared to accept or or receive an assignment that night to start drafting our report. So we have a chance of collectively editing and so on well in advance of May 2nd when it has to be submitted.
I think that's a really good idea. Yeah, let's move forward with that.
So Jordan, is that possible?
In terms of adding a CBRC meeting on the 20th,
Yeah.
it is possible.
Or could we pitch it out to the committee and see if there's a best date? Maybe just
Yeah.
a doodle poll or whatever you guys use.
Yeah, I could. Yes, I could do that actually tomorrow morning in an email to everybody. I could ask, or I can create a doodle poll and throw out a few different options and just see what lands. I also will just go ahead and take the liberty of putting together the. I'll copy last year's report and just start a draft document for you all that we can start using. And then I'm also planning on sending you all kind of a reworked Q&A situation or document or process because, and I was talking with Roger earlier today, but also just the way that we operated last year and the way the board has been operating. It's kind of helpful to separate out previous questions from new questions that might arise for you while you're actually looking at the budget. And so I'll come up with a good way to kind of separate those out so you can all see that.
And the doodle poll, it's got to be a deadline on responding to that. So we allow time for public notice to be given and so on, all those requirements that have to be done prior to our meeting. So
I'll make sure to include a deadline in that email.
Jordan, this
Yep.
is Lisa. Do you know when we're getting the local option levy numbers or the report?
That's a great question that I don't have the answer to, but it is something I just asked a little over a week ago. But yeah, I'll follow up with that tomorrow and get an answer back to you.
Okay, because then I can start drafting that based on last year's and then with this past year's numbers. So we can at least knock that one out early.
Absolutely.
I assume a local level part also needs to be done by May 2nd.
Correct.
Yeah, both.
But
both
it's not difficult, and it's just taking this past year's numbers and putting those into the letter format. And
by far, it's
I'll make sure it's posted so people can review it. But it's fairly, there's not a lot of detail to it. But just confirming that they've upheld the local option levy.
Yeah, and just so CBRC members know, the local option levy report is based on the previous budget year, not this current budget year that we're in, because we're not yet finished with the so.
Right. So I will compile all of these things into an email for you all tomorrow morning. And then is there, other than that, is there anything else you'd want me to include in a message out to everyone? You're going to make my job too easy tomorrow.
Well, we got to give you something to do.
Yeah.
Jordan, I would just say a reminder that these are our last meetings of significance in the next, couple of weeks, and we really want everybody to be able to participate on.
All right. Yep.
Absolutely. So, hearing, or I don't see any hands raised, and so if we're ready to adjourn, we can do so.
Thank you for leading tonight, Roger.
Yep, thanks a lot.
Okay,
Thank you
well,
all. Thank you all so much.
thank you for your.